Luffy will lose his eye at the end of the Elbaf arc, and it will be none other than Shanks' brother Shamrock who will take it from him. And later in this video, I will explain exactly how I see this happening. Elbaf is shaping up to be a monumental arc for all of the Straw Hats. Robin is learning a lot about the ancient history from the Harley and the ancient mural. Frankie is learning about the Atom Tree and the ancient weapons from the mural. Zoro and Nami seem to be getting a lot of spotlight, and Usopp is set to get some major growth as well. But the biggest development and growth that will come out of the Elbaf arc will be Luffy's, as this is going to be the arc where Luffy finally becomes the man worthy of Pirate King. As we can already tell that this lore-heavy arc is starting to give us answers about Luffy's Devil Fruit, Joy Boy, Nika, and more history that will all pertain to Luffy, and will allow him to realize that there is much more to him and his connections to a lot of the One Piece world and history. So Luffy is finally going to realize his relevance and ties to the Sun God, which will definitely allow him to power up his Gear 5th, but I'll save that for another video. But all of the lore and power-ups aside, I think that the Elbaf arc will be an arc that allows us to finally see Luffy prove himself as someone who is equal to the likes of Roger, Whitebeard, and of course, Shanks. And I think that Shamrock, Shanks' twin brother, will be the perfect catalyst for this final moment of growth and showcase of Luffy actually becoming a great pirate. And in order to understand why, we need to go all the way back to Chapter 1. Shanks and Luffy are best friends, and Shanks is like Luffy's father figure or mentor in a way. But more importantly, Shanks in Chapter 1 represents what a great pirate is meant to be. He's kind, he doesn't pick unnecessary fights, he's strong-willed, but he always sticks up for his friends when they need him to. And when Shanks passes his straw hat to Luffy, he tells Luffy to find him and to return the hat only once Luffy is a great pirate. And from that moment on, Luffy has been progressing himself and becoming basically his own version of Shanks. Luffy set out to sea, got loyal crewmates, fought with Buggy, got a sniper from Syrup Village, went to Logue Town, and took his friends to the Grand Line, had great adventures, defeated strong and famous pirates, and when he got to Jaya, he was made fun of, he had drinks spilled on him, the whole bar was laughing at him, and Bellamy told him that there is no such thing as a Sky Island, and there is no point in believing in things like the One Piece. But did Luffy let it get to him? No. He just shrugged it off. He didn't fight back, and he stayed steadfast in his own beliefs, and instead only came back to fight when his friends had been hurt. Why? Because that's what Shanks taught him. And in Water 7 and Enies Lobby, the Straw Hat Pirates became a real pirate crew that was heading for the New World, and Luffy became the captain that he needed to be for the tough journey ahead, once again improving himself and becoming a better pirate. Then, at Sabaody and Marineford, Luffy suffered great losses unlike he had ever imagined could happen. So he and his crew decided to train and become stronger in order to head into the New World. And funnily enough, Shanks was the one who stopped the Marineford War and allowed Luffy to escape. And when Shanks found his straw hat at Marineford, he heard that Luffy was unconscious and injured after losing his brother. He simply said that he didn't want to see Luffy yet, as Luffy had not yet met the requirements of their sacred promise. Even though Shanks and Luffy had not seen each other for 10 years, even though Shanks knew that Luffy has gotten so much stronger, even though he knew that Luffy was hoping to see him and return the straw hat at some point, even though Luffy was on the same island as Shanks for the first time in a decade, Shanks simply refused to see him, as Luffy had clearly not yet become a great pirate who could proudly return the hat to Shanks. So, Shanks simply sent the straw hat right back to Luffy. And Luffy trained for 2 years with Silver's Rayleigh, who was once the right-hand man of Gold D. Roger, which is also another purposeful coincidence, as Shanks' childhood was spent learning from both Roger and Rayleigh, making Luffy and Shanks both students of Rayleigh's hockey training. And then the Straw Hats headed to the second half of the Grand Line, fought their way to Dressrosa, and Luffy once again stepped up as a pirate by, begrudgingly, getting a Grand Fleet. Though it's also brought up that Shanks doesn't expect his fleet to ever pay him or give him anything either, as he just wants to help and protect them. And then the crew went to Wano, led a raid, and defeated Kaido by unlocking multiple advanced forms of haki, making Luffy into a Yonko, giving him the same standing and notoriety as Shanks. And Shanks then proceeded to kind of show up and make sure that the Marines wouldn't be trying to pick on the Wano Alliance right after they just defeated 2 emperors. And this shows some more about Shanks' character, as it exemplifies his stance on letting the new generation grow and blossom into their own people, except when they're mass murderers who are aiming to destroy all of his friends. Yeah, probably don't try and become that kind of person. And then, interestingly enough, Luffy then takes that lesson of letting the younger generation become something great during the Egghead arc and applies it to Bonnie, as she was really inspired by Luffy and Nika, and he pushed her to become the free person that she had dreamed of her whole life. This was a great moment of Luffy getting so much closer to being worthy of meeting Shanks, but what could he possibly still have to do to become worthy of just meeting his mentor figure? Well, as I said previously, I think that Elbaf will be Luffy's final trial to becoming a great pirate, just like Shanks. And I think that Luffy will ultimately have to make a similar sacrifice. And instead of Shanks saving Luffy and getting his arm bit off by a Sea King, I think that Luffy will be facing Shanks' evil twin, Shamrock. Currently, Shamrock is going to kidnap a bunch of Elbaf children, and obviously, as always, that is not going to fly with the Straw Hats. So, the crew will face up against the God Knights in order to get the children back, and I'm sure they'll succeed without the children being injured, except that Shamrock will have one last child held captive, Colin. See, Colin was introduced before we even got to Elbaf, when we briefly saw Shanks visiting Elbaf. And what was he doing when we first saw him? He was begging Shanks to join his crew, just like Luffy when he was a kid, and obviously Shanks told him no. So wouldn't it be perfect if instead of Shanks saving child Luffy, it's Luffy as the stand-in for Shanks, and Shamrock as the kidnapper and Sea King, with Colin and Kid Luffy's situation. But why will Luffy lose an eye? Why am I even assuming something like that? Well, there's a lot of evidence to support this happening before the story ends. And the evidence is more than just because he's a cool pirate, matey. It actually once again all goes back to chapter 1, as the first time we even see Luffy outside of the volume cover and color spread. He's standing in front of Shanks and the red hair pirates, trying to prove himself to Shanks that he's tough and that Shanks should let him join the crew. And how does Luffy try to prove this? By trying and missing to stab himself in the eye, thus creating his scar under his eye. Also, Oda famously once said that later on in One Piece, a pirate would eventually appear with an eye patch, and that when that eye patch pirate appears, that will be a clue to the readers that One Piece is nearing its end. And he even drew Luffy with an eye patch to go along with that statement. I'm not even joking. And if you're still not convinced and believe that someone else will be the eye patch pirate, then I actually have one last piece of evidence that Luffy will lose his eye specifically in this arc. As in Norse mythology, which is Elbaf's main inspiration, one of the most prominent characters, Odin, famously sacrifices his eye to obtain wisdom. So, just like how Shanks saved Luffy from the bandit and the Lord of the Coast, and having to sacrifice his arm to do so, Luffy, at the end of his storyline of becoming a great pirate, just like Shanks and Roger, will save Colin from Shamrock, and in the process, his eye will either get stabbed or slashed out, or get bitten off by a Cerberus head. And just like how Shanks reassured a crying and grateful Luffy by saying that his arm is a small price to pay for Luffy's life, Luffy will look at Colin and reassure him too, telling him it's fine. He saved Colin's life. It's a small price to pay. It's just an eye.